Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this press conference with Director General Roberto Azevêdo. This will be Director General Azevedo's final press conference as DG here at the Centre William Rappard. He will give a brief opening statement and then we'll take your questions. May I remind you that this is a press conference that's being conducted both in a physical way and also via WebEx. If you are participating via WebEx and would like to ask a question, please do press the icon at the bottom of your screen, which will then put your hand up. Dan will know that you've asked a question and we will take your question. Without further ado, let me give the floor to you, Director General.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, and thanks not only for today, for the last 7 years, helping me navigate the waters of the press and public relations. Thanks for that. Thanks, everyone. 7 years ago, we had a different conversation. It was the beginning of a journey. Now this is the end of a cycle, so that's a somewhat different conversation. But I'm very happy that after the 7 years, we are where we are at the end of the day. Could we have done more? Certainly. Could it have been worse? I have no doubts about it either. So I'm overall very content with what we have achieved so far. You had access, I suppose, to the statement that I made this morning. So I'm not going to repeat everything now so that we gain time and I give you a chance to ask the questions you want to ask and focus on things that are of particular interest to you. The WTO now is in transition mode. I think that we have already ongoing the process of selection of my successor. I will not make comments about that. That's a process that is conducted by the members and they are fully sovereign to conduct. All I can say about that is that the WTO is truly privileged to have as candidates people of such high caliber that I am sure are going to continue the work we're doing and guiding members into a new era of more opportunities and outcomes here in Geneva. Now, I am not going to say much more, just to thank all of you, both those who are here in Geneva and those reporters who are not in Geneva, who are attending by via the webcast. So I thank you all, not only for being here today, but for being with us for the past 7 years. This is a very technical work, what we do here. The intricacies of diplomacy and politics are not always very obvious, and you have a huge role to play in informing the public, informing the stakeholders about what is happening here in Geneva, and I always could count on you to perform that role at the highest standards. So thank you all very much for the work you have done, and I hope you'll continue to do that and support the system and inform about the system in an accurate and informed manner after I leave and throughout the tenure of my successor. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
The first question is to Assis Moreira. Assis, you have the floor, please.
Assis Moreira, Valor Econômico, São Paulo. Mr. Azevedo, what could have you done differently in these 7 years? And the other question, what are you going to do from now on?
Well, on the first part, I think my statement kind of raises that issue, what happened over the past 7 years. And I would say that I would break that down in two parts. I think one is the substance. And in terms of substance, what was important is that when I took office, And not, I have to say, not by failure of my predecessors in any way. It was just the political environment and the interests and the decisions of members did not allow the WTO to conclude any multilateral agreement until then. So we were already 18 years into the existence of the WTO with no agreements whatsoever. So our priority at the time was to deliver agreements and show that the multilateral track was viable. And that's what we tried to do, and I think we were quite successful. We started with the Bali Trade Facilitation Agreement, and then 2 years later in Nairobi, we eliminated all export subsidies for agricultural products, which is something that members were trying to achieve for a long time. I remember that even before I came to Geneva as ambassador, we members were already struggling to get that done, and we finally did it, so it was a big accomplishment right there. The expansion of the Information Technology Agreement, which is a $1 trillion plus agreement as well, so and very contemporary, by the way. Though that part was very important, but it was not only about the substance, I think it was also about the way we did things. And one of the things that I tried to do was to be very transparent, and all the closed doors meetings and things like that became a thing of the past. All negotiations were fully transparent. Even when we had small meetings and conversations like that, it was informed. It was not hidden. It was not a secret. Everybody knew, and I would say, these are the people that I met, and this is what we did, and this is what we think is possible. What do you think? And everybody else would participate in that conversation as well. And also in terms of how to do things, we began to be more flexible in the conversation. So particularly after Buenos Aires, with the joint statement initiatives, we began to talk about issues that were not on the agenda of the WTO, but that were extremely important. And you know what they are: electronic commerce, investment facilitation. We were talking about small and medium enterprises, empowerment of women through trade. We were talking about domestic regulation of services. They were not fully multilateral conversations, but they were open conversations. So anybody who wanted to join could come in, anybody who wanted to leave could walk out. And that kind of flexibility is now giving the WTO a second wind. We now see members excited about what we're discussing. We are seeing the private sector a lot more engaged than what they were before. And that is all happening without forgetting the multilateral track. So we're still talking and advancing Doha round issues, even if not the round per se, but the issues are still very much alive. We cannot forget them, cannot sweep them under the rug. They're too important for a sizable portion of the membership. So I'm not going to go very much on this anymore because that's on my statement this morning. So you will find it right there. And as to the future, I am not sure yet. There are conversations ongoing, and I'm planning to do different things. There are nice projects out there that I would like to pursue. I'm sure something is going to happen. As far as the future is concerned, for me, what's more important now is to use whatever free time I have for, I don't know how many weeks I will have that free time to spend with my wife, Lele, who is here. She was always a big part of everything I have achieved, whether I wanted or not. And my family, my daughters, my granddaughters. Hopefully we can interact a little bit more, even though not physically because of the travel restrictions that are in place everywhere. Anyway, thank you.
Let's take two from the floor, Christian Ulrich and then Bryce Bashuk, and then we'll go to the WebEx. Christian, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Azevêdo. Christiana with the German press agency. Sad to see you go. Can you please share with us one piece piece of advice that you would have liked to have 7 years ago that would have made your mission even more successful and that you would impart now on your successor? Thank you.
Yes. It's a tough question because we like to think that we thought of everything, right? But I think one advice that I would give to my successor and that I maybe did not hear when I was walking in is be ready for anything, because things can change in a split second. It can be a political event. It can be a natural event, a great disaster, something that requires your attention all of a sudden. It can be a virus that comes from God knows where, and all of a sudden we are all facing now the steepest recession in peace times in recent history. And we have to respond. And an organization that is perceived as a slow organization, that then takes time to react, when we face these emergencies, we have to be ready to react quickly. And members have to be with the right mindset and the right frame of mind to react quickly to these things. And what I would tell my successor is make sure members understand that they need to act fast sometimes, that we don't have the luxury of time on our side, as often as we would like to have. Negotiations, trade negotiations take a long time, but we need to be faster. We need to be able to respond. The reality on the ground is changing much faster than before. So the times and the timing that we had in the times of the GATT and then in the early years of the WTO, that reality is no longer here. The WTO, to survive, any international organization to survive these days, has to be in a position to respond quickly and efficiently if it wants to maintain relevance in today's world.
Bryce Bashuk, you have the next question, please.
Thank you. Bryce Bashik, Director General, thank you for all your service over these years. Wanted to ask you a question about WTO reform. What's the most ideal version of a future WTO that you would like to see? Something that members should be working towards under the next DG. Thank you.
Well, I made the point in my statement this morning that as important as what the reform is going to look like, it's about the how we do the reform. And I think that's the most important part, the how. So because the what members are going to decide, and I have said over and over again that I don't believe that a big bang reform is the way forward. We need to do things progressively, taking steps, sure steps and constant steps in the right direction. So instead of spending years deciding what the reform can be or what should reform encompass, I think we should move right ahead, which follows through on the previous answer. We need to be fast. We need to be quick. And as long as members decide these are things that we want to change, these are things that we want to do, the organization has to have the tools and the mechanisms to respond quickly to that. And we have been doing that. So these joint statement initiatives, these negotiations that are ongoing that don't involve all 164, might involve sometimes 80 or 100 of them, which sometimes represent more than 90% of global trade. That's the way to move forward. You don't have to bring everybody in. You don't have to force results on anyone. But you cannot also preclude the conversation and the negotiations from happening. And members will accede and will leave depending on their interests. And that kind of structure, that kind of flexibility, If we can, how can I say that, crystallize, if we can make it more of a fixture of the WTO work, I think that will be a great quantum leap into the future. Now, having said all that, that does not mean that we can or should abandon the multilateral track. That is the essence of the organization. That's what we should always be striving for. And there are issues out there that are not known, that are not new, and that need to be addressed. And that's clearly the case of agriculture. That's clearly the case of services in many different ways, intellectual property, industrial goods, subsidization. All those things are extremely important. They were part of the Doha round. Those are issues that cannot be swept under the table. They are still very much out there. So on top of, and at the same time that we deal with the more pressing 21st century issues, we have to address these things as well if we want to have a balanced and legitimate work going forward in the organization.
Thank you very much. Let's take a WebEx question now. DG, this question comes from Florencia Carboni of Trade News in Buenos Aires. Florencia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning, Mr. Azevêdo. I'd like to know, what do you think were your biggest success and your biggest mistake during these 7 years? And if you, in sometimes, regret resigning from the DG in advance? Thank you.
I'll start with the last one. No, I don't regret resigning early. It was a very carefully thought decision. And as I said, staying on would not end the pandemic. It would not all of a sudden bring trade back to normal. And it would hurt the system because of the coincidence of the preparation of the ministerial conference and the succession of the Director General. The two things will happen at the same time. That would be a disaster. So I definitely don't regret that. That's part of life. It was going to happen anyway, so it's time to go. And that is something that if anything, what I regret is leaving behind the people that I cherish and that I have developed very strong relationships here in Geneva and everywhere else. This morning was very emotional. My presentation and the words that I heard from so far, almost 60 delegations already took the floor to say goodbye, and the words that I heard were very touching, very emotional for me. This is a day that I am going to remember for the rest of my life, and in a positive way. It will give me comfort to understand that even though things are difficult, sometimes it's the support that you get from those who are working with you to see things through that is the most valuable asset that you have. On the other questions about the success, I think I would be repeating what I just said. I think it's the substantive accomplishment, the agreements we reached, the innovative ways of negotiating, of conducting things in the WTO, doing things differently. That for me is a huge achievement because we are an organization that doesn't shift course very easily. Things to change require a lot of effort, a lot of understanding, and a lot of coordination among members, and I'm very happy that we have achieved all that. Mistakes, I'm sure there were, but mistakes is often in the eye of the beholder. So I will leave that to you to assess any kind of mistakes. What I can say, there's nothing I regret. That I can tell you. Everything we have done, I would not have done differently. They were carefully thought. I listened and I heard a lot of people. I am not a very impulsive person who takes decision on a whim. I hear people, I hear my assistants, my advisors, my counselors, I hear the members a lot, and then after listening, I take the best decision that I have, that I can take with the information that I have at that point in time. And once it's taken, that's the best I could do, and I have no regrets in taking any of them.
Let's stick with WebEx now, and the question goes to Hannah Monacan of Inside U.S. Trade. Hannah, you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon, Director General. Hannah Monacan, Inside U.S. Trade, and good luck moving forward. My question is, what do you see as you head out as the biggest challenge facing the WTO? And is it something that a Director General can even resolve moving forward?
Well, there are, I would say, a number of big challenges moving forward. One of them, of course, is dispute settlement. I think without a properly functioning dispute settlement system, the WTO is not going to perform its role adequately for several reasons. First, because it will lose this instrument, right? Which is extremely important to depoliticize things and to find solutions that members end up using to resolve their differences on the trade and economic front. Second, because if you don't have a properly functioning enforcement system, the negotiations of rules itself is affected. Because at the end of the day, members are thinking, okay, so how are we going to enforce what we have agreed? And I don't see that yet. I think members are still negotiating in good faith, but there is a presumption on the part of all negotiators that this situation of dispute settlement is going to be solved, is going to be fixed somehow. It's not that the system is not functioning. It is functioning. The appeals stage is not functioning at this point in time, but the panels are, and there are members, there's groups of members who are also working on what we call stopgap and temporary arrangements that would allow the dispute settlement system with the two stages, panel and appeal, to function for disputes amongst the signatories. And that may grow, they may have more, they may have different groups. I don't know. That's something that for members to decide. But anyway, going back to your question, I think that's a big challenge because that affects the core of the work of the organization. The other thing that I think we need to address as we go on is how the WTO can, and the rules of the WTO and what we negotiate here, how can we do things in a way that ease trade tensions that were in place even before the pandemic struck. So I don't have to, particularly you, Hannah, and the people from Inside U.S. Trade, you know exactly what the tensions are. Is there a way that the system can contribute to minimize, to mitigate, to resolve even, hopefully, those tensions? I think that's a huge challenge for the system.
Let's take a question from the floor. Let's go to Ling Xin from Xinhua. Xin, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Keith. Director General, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your work over the past 7 years as Director General? And could you explain why? Thank you.
That's good. That's good. I would rate 12. Because we achieved everything that we could, and there were no efforts spared. We did the very best we could do, and together with the Secretariat, and they know, we have worked way over, what would be reasonable to expect from human beings over this period. And we did our best. And that's all that I think one could expect from people who are in our position. I'm sure my successor and the Secretariat will continue to do that. And I would say these are fantastic people. We achieved a lot given the circumstances. It may well be that people who don't live the day-to-day of these buildings don't understand the challenges, but I do. I do. And the people who live here do understand that as well. What has been achieved over these past 7 years in terms of substance and processes, it's outstanding. I'm very happy with what we have done. Now, can we do more? Could we have done more? Maybe, but we did the best we could.
Et la prochaine question est pour Agnès Pedrero de Agence France Presse. Agnès, vous avez la parole.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Director General. Good luck for your future. And if you can give us more information about the nice projects you have, if it's in politics in your country or more in the private sector or others. And a question on WTO. So you give us a quite positive impression of what you have done and what you have explained. But then last week we were all here listening the 8 candidates, and they presented a very dramatic image of how WTO is now. So how can you explain those differences, that you have worked a lot, but at the same time, all the candidates are saying that WTO is in a big crisis? Thank you.
Well, that's what I said in my statement this morning, actually, and I'll start with the second part of your question. I remember, not even when I took office, when I got in Geneva as an ambassador back in 2008, probably one of my early statements in the General Council and talking to other ambassadors in Geneva was, we are before an existential crisis. You know, the system is under tremendous pressure. It's under tremendous pressure to deliver because it is important and because the world expects this system to deliver things and to deliver important things. And we were not doing that. We had not been doing that for quite some time. In 2013, when I took office, I said, look, the system is at a crossroads. You know, we are really facing tremendous challenges. I'm leaving 7 years later, the system is still under tremendous pressure. And I mark my words, when my successor leaves, the system is going to be facing tremendous pressures also. And that will probably continue to be the case. The day that the system is not facing tremendous pressure, the system is over. It's because people don't expect anything from the system anymore. And I don't think that is the case. The fact that it is under pressure is precisely the reason why we work so hard. It's because people expect things. We can deliver things, and the things we deliver here have a direct impact on the day-to-day lives of citizens and stakeholders across the globe, especially for the poorer and the most vulnerable ones. So I don't see any inconsistency with that. In fact, I think that's a good thing. On where and what I will be doing in the future, I'm beginning to have a better picture about that after a few weeks of, considering and thinking. I'm happy to say that there were a number of projects that actually, came forward. So I am narrowing down at this point in time. Most likely it will not be in Geneva, unfortunately. I love the town, I love the city, I've been here for so long. But that's life. You have to move, you have to do different things. I would say it's not in Brazil. So I hope that answers part of your question as well.
Let's now go to WebEx, and it's a question to Doug Palmer of Politico. Doug, you have the floor.
Hi, can you all hear me all right? Good. Thanks very much. I appreciate you doing this, Director General. It's been a pleasure to cover you over the years. in one of the press conferences last week, the Kenyan candidate, Amina Mohammed, talked about how when she was there in 2015, the WTO was a beehive of activity, just lots of stuff going on all over the place, and that's not the case now. It sounds like you don't really agree with that perception, but I wonder if you would address that, and what do you think was the reason that that things have kind of turned so dour between 2015 and 2020, if that is the case?
Well, I have to say the WTO is very good at doing things below the radar. So a lot of people who are not in the rooms, who are not in the buildings, are not familiar with what is happening here. I would say there is a lot of activity going on now. We are on track for a ministerial conference, which I hoped would be under my stewardship this last June. Well, the pandemic happened, so that's not going to happen. But I am pretty sure that you're going to see a lot of activity going on between now and MC12, both at the multilateral track with all the issues that you see and that I already mentioned: fishery subsidies, agriculture, domestic regulation for services. There are a number of other things that are going on, and with ongoing negotiations on electronic commerce, on investments facilitation, small and medium enterprise. There is a myriad of things going on, and my successors will have their hands full.
We have time for one more question. Let's go to Ayana Dreyer from Borderlex. Ayana, you have the floor, please. Are you there, Ayana? Nope. Well, I have a question that's been sent by WhatsApp, and it comes from Gabriela Sotomayor from Pochesco, the Mexican news agency. And the question from Gabriela is, what is the main challenge the new Director General will face during these times of pandemic?
Well, I feel like I am repeating myself a little bit. Again, the major challenges, I think, if we narrow down on the pandemic itself, and because I have already mentioned about the challenges for the system, for the future, let me say something different. Let me talk about the pandemic specifically. And I think addressing the pandemic, there are big variables. I think the first and clear one is we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how effective we're going to be in fighting it. We don't know how quickly or it will be spreading or be controlled in different parts of the globe. We don't know how far away from a vaccine we are, an effective one. All those things are extremely important to tell us how deep into the hole we're going to go before we begin to get out of the hole. What is important to understand is that we have the ability, unlike other previous peacetime crises, to get out of the hole in good shape, or let's say in better shape than in other situations. Why is that? Because the engine of the economic engine is still functioning, or was still functioning, and therefore resuming activities is easier because we were not dealing before with fundamental misalignments of the economic indicators. Now, having said that, the longer the pandemic goes on, the more difficult it is going to be to resume normal operations because the engine is going to suffer more and more. Companies will, go bankrupt. People who are being laid off will have more difficulty to be hired back. And we also have the costs of, maintaining economic activity and support to citizens throughout the pandemic, fiscal costs, which are going to weigh on the recovery. I would say, regardless of how we manage to get out of this situation that we are in now, What is important, and that's a huge challenge, and it's not for the WTO only, it is for international organizations and the international community as a whole, is how do we prepare for the next one? We need to have mechanisms in place that will kick in automatically, because the knee-jerk reaction before any emergency, like a pandemic of this nature, is to protect the ones that are close to us, right? So before me and my family, then my community, my street, my city, my country. So it's concentric circles which do not always favor the kind of cooperation that is needed to truly address and effectively address a crisis that is global in nature. Even if it isn't in the very early and first stages, it will become global unless you control it very, very early on. And those kind of mechanisms are very hard to negotiate and to decide upon in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of the crisis. So let's use the time that we have now between this one and the next crisis to work together, countries, governments, companies, and international organizations to figure out what we need to have in place so that that can be a rapid deployment mechanism in situations that require this degree of international cooperation and collaboration. We should be ready by now. We had this crisis before. This is not the first one. When we failed before, let's not fail again.
Thank you, Director General. Thanks to all of you who are here, and thanks to those who have participated via WebEx. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Bye.